The Illinois River looks harmless from the bank, brown and slow and ordinary. Then a boat opens its throttle and the water detonates. Fish come out by the dozen, 40 pounds of muscle each, flung 10 feet into the air by the sound of the motor. This year, crews pulled the 50 millionth pound of these fish from that river, all to keep them out of Lake Michigan. And it is still full of them. The people who study this water are no longer sure what is swimming in it. Two kinds of fish came in 50 years ago. What is coming out now is not quite either one. That is the question this river has handed to more than 24 agencies, and none of them can close it. Not what these fish are called. Everyone knows the names. The question is what they are turning into and why nothing anyone does with that river seems to make them fewer or smaller or one bit easier to hold back. 50 years of effort, a quarter of a century of organized war, more than 100 million pounds of fish hauled onto barges and turned into fertilizer, and the river hands back more every season. And some of what it hands back no longer fits in the book. So let me tell you how two ordinary fish became the thing that Illinois cannot get ahead of, and why the biologists who know these waters best have started choosing their words like people who are not sure of the ground under them. They are called silver carp and bighead carp, and they did not swim here on their own. They were carried. In the early 1970s, fish farmers and wastewater plants across the American South imported them from the rivers of Eastern Asia to do a specific job. They are filter feeders. They eat plankton, the drifting cloud of microscopic plants and animals that hangs in open water. And they eat it in quantities that are hard to picture. A single one of these fish can eat somewhere between 5 and 20% of its entire body weight in a single day, every day. So they were dropped into catfish ponds and sewage lagoons across the South to keep the water clear, cheaply, without a drop of chemical. For a few quiet years it worked exactly as designed. Then the rivers rose. Through the late 1970s and into the 80s, season after season of flooding lifted the carp out of those ponds and washed them into the Mississippi River system, and once they were loose in open river, there was no calling them back. They moved up the Mississippi, up the Missouri, and up the Illinois, which matters more than all the rest combined, because the Illinois River is a doorway. Through the canal system that was cut across Chicago more than a century ago, it connects the whole Mississippi Basin straight to Lake Michigan, straight into the Great Lakes, the largest surface of fresh water on the face of the earth, and a fishery worth something on the order of $7 billion. And the Great Lakes are built on exactly the food these fish live to strip away: plankton. The same drifting cloud that feeds the young of every native fish in that water. Drop a filter feeder that eats half its weight a day into that system, and it starts stripping out the base that the whole food web is built on. The very food the young of every native fish in the lakes needs to survive its first year. There is one more number worth holding on to. The Great Lakes Commission estimates that close to 1 million motorboats and personal watercraft use those waters. Now put a fish that launches itself at the sound of a motor into the middle of 1 million boats, and you can see why the people whose job is to think about this do not sleep well. Here is what these fish found waiting when they arrived. Nothing. Nothing in these rivers is built to eat them once they reach full size. No native predator here, not the biggest catfish, not the muskie, not anything with a mouth, can take down a grown carp, because these fish grow fast and they grow enormous and they climb out of the danger zone within their first year of life. A silver carp reaches around 3 feet in length and can push toward 110 pounds. Though most of the ones flinging themselves at your boat run smaller than that, in the 20 to 40 pound range. The bighead is the true giant. It grows to nearly 5 feet long. It commonly reaches 40 pounds, and individuals have been recorded above 100. That is a fish the size of a grown man, and unlike its cousin, it does not leap. It hangs in the deep water, and it feeds, and it keeps getting bigger, silent and unseen, while everyone watches the ones jumping at the surface. And it has time. A silver carp can live around 20 years. A bighead can live longer still. These are not fish that flash through the system in a season and die off. They settle in and they wait, and they outlast almost everything sent to remove them. And they breed the way almost nothing else in that river breeds. A single female bighead can carry close to 1.9 million eggs in one season. They ask for very little. A rise in the water after a hard rain, a stretch of moving current to keep the eggs suspended and drifting, and a whole new generation is loose in the channel. In some pools of the lower Illinois, biologists now find every stage of life present at once, in the same water on the same day. The eggs, the fry, the half-grown juveniles, and the enormous adults over all of it. Not a population clinging on at the edges, a population that owns the place. You can measure what that does to a river by what steadily disappears from it. These carp strip the plankton out of the water column, and plankton is the floor that everything else is built on. The native fish that depend on it, the gizzard shad, the bigmouth buffalo, the young of nearly every prize sport fish in the system suddenly find the pantry stripped bare by something that eats half its own weight before the day is out. There is no fight, no dramatic kill, nothing you could film. There is only a slow, total emptying. In the worst hit stretches, these carp swelled into the overwhelming majority of the living weight in the water. In some reaches of the system, by the estimates that get quoted most, they came to make up as much as 70% of the entire fish population. Not one part of the ecosystem among many, very nearly the whole of it wearing the river like a skin. And the danger is not only quiet and ecological. Some of it is loud and physical, and it happens at the surface, to people. Because the silver carp, the smaller of the two, has a reflex that no one has fully tamed. The vibration of a boat motor, and sometimes just a passing train, or a startled flock of geese lifting off the water, sends it rocketing straight up out of the river. Not one fish. Dozens at once. Sometimes a whole stretch of water erupting into airborne bodies as a boat passes through. And a 20 or 30 pound fish moving at boat speed hits like a thrown cinder block. Boaters on these rivers have been struck in the face and left with broken jaws, broken noses, cracked ribs, concussions. People have been knocked clean out of moving boats. The Federal Wildlife Agency has stated plainly in writing that a collision between a boater and a leaping silver carp carries the potential to kill. There are stretches of the Missouri River where water skiing has become too dangerous to attempt because most of the fish jump behind the boat straight into the space a skier occupies. An entire way of using a river. Gone, not because the water changed, but because of what now lives in it. For years, all of this added up to a single clean story. And the clean version was almost reassuring in its clarity. It went like this. There were 2 invasive species in this river, both fully understood, both cataloged down to the last gill raker. Dangerous, without question, and destructive on a scale that is hard to put into words, but known. And therefore, in theory, containable, if you were willing to fight hard enough at the one place that actually decides it, the narrow throat of the upper Illinois, where the river bends toward the lake. Hold that line, the thinking went, and the Great Lakes stay clean. So Illinois built a line, and it has manned that line ever since. There is an electric barrier set into the canal, roughly 37 miles from Lake Michigan, a length of water wired with a current strong enough to turn back any fish that tries to swim through it. And above the population front, in the upper river about 50 miles out from the lake, crews go out under contract year after year after year, and they pull carp from the water by the netful. That upper effort is where a large share of the removal happens. Further downstream, across the lower 240 miles of the Illinois, a second and even larger removal program runs, in pools where the carp are so abundant that every life stage swims together. And here's the detail that tells you how brutal this work really is. You cannot fish these carp out the ordinary way. They will not take a baited hook. A filter feeder does not chase a lure, so every last pound of that 50 million had to be taken by other means, netted out of the water by the ton, run down with electricity, hauled up by hand, one heavy load at a time, and then trucked off to be ground into fertilizer and animal feed. Once you understand that, the number stops sounding like a number. 50 million pounds is 15 years of people standing in boats, pulling a river's worth of muscle out of the water by force and watching it fill back in behind them. 50 million pounds is roughly the weight of 5,000 elephants. That is what came out, and the river barely noticed. Together, these efforts are where the 50 million pounds comes from. State agencies, federal agencies, more than 24 partners, running one of the largest freshwater removal operations ever attempted anywhere, all of it resting on one confident idea. We know these fish. We know exactly where they are, and we can hold them back from the lake. For more than a decade, that explanation held together. If you are finding this river as strange as I do, this is the moment to consider following along, because the next part is where the clean version starts to break, and it is the reason the people who have given their whole careers to these fish now speak about them so carefully. Because the confident story depends on one thing being true above all others, it depends on there being two fish, silver carp on one side, bighead carp on the other. Two species you can tell apart at a glance, count on separate ledgers, and manage as the distinct things they are. And in their native rivers in China, that is precisely the situation. Silver and bighead carp live in the very same water and do not interbreed. They keep to themselves. They have kept to themselves, by the best estimates, for something like 3.5 million years. In the Illinois River, they stopped keeping to themselves. Researchers pulling carp from the Illinois and the Mississippi began finding fish that would not sort cleanly into one bin or the other. Fish carrying the body of one species and the features of the other, mixed together in a single animal. At first, that could be shrugged off as the occasional freak, a stray 1 in 1,000 cross that meant nothing. Then a team of researchers working through the Illinois Natural History Survey took an indiscriminate sample of 120 of these fish and ran their genetics. And the figure that came back was not a rounding error and could not be shrugged off. Better than 1 in 5 of them were hybrids, 22.5%. Living crosses between silver and bighead, swimming freely through the river, and breeding. And it did not end at simple first-generation crosses. The same work confirmed something that had never once been documented in the wild in this country before. Not just hybrids, but the children of hybrids, and their children after them. The crosses were breeding back into both parent species and into one another, generation stacked on generation, blending the two separate gene pools into a single mixed one. There was even a direction to the mixing. When the researchers traced the maternal line, the DNA passed down only from the mother, they found that the great majority of the hybrids, around 88% of them, carried silver carp mothers. The crossing was not random noise. It had a pattern, a grain, a current running through it, which is exactly the sort of thing that happens when two populations are not making occasional mistakes, but genuinely merging. The scientists have a name for what that produces. They call it a hybrid swarm. A population in which the clean, bright line between silver carp and bighead carp is dissolving, one fish at a time, one spawn at a time, out in open water where no one can stop it. And here's the part that visibly unsettles the people whose entire job is to watch these fish. They can no longer reliably tell them apart. The first-generation crosses you can often still catch by eye, by a telltale twist in the gill rakers, the fine comb-like structures the fish use to strain their food from the water. But once you move past that first generation, into the back crosses and the deeper mixtures, those tells fade out and disappear. A trained biologist can hold one of these fish in both hands, check every field mark in the entire book, and call it a silver carp or call it a bighead, and be flatly genetically wrong. In one sample, better than 1 in 8 of the fish that experienced crews identified by sight turned out, in the lab, to be something other than what they had been called on the boat. Sit for a moment with what that does to the confidence story. The whole containment plan, the barrier, the netting, the removal, the monitoring of where the front sits and how fast it moves, all of it rests on knowing what is in the water. On counting silver here and bighead there, and tracking the leading edge as it creeps toward the lake. But the leading edge is increasingly made of fish that do not read as one thing or the other. They are managing two species on paper, while the river has quietly begun manufacturing a third category that fits in neither column, that the trained eye cannot sort, and that no plan on any desk in the state was written to account for. And that, in the end, is the real shape of the thing. Not one fish that ballooned to some impossible weight overnight. something slower and stranger and much harder to fight. The category itself is what is growing. It is blurring outward at the edges, swelling past the two clean names we carried it in under, becoming, quite literally, bigger than the words we have for it. And no one, not one biologist on any of those 24 teams, can tell you with confidence where the blurring stops. So the honest answer does not resolve into a single ending. It splits into possibilities, and not one of them is the comfortable one you would want. The first possibility is the hopeful one, and even the hope has a hook buried in it. Some of the research suggests these hybrids may actually be weaker than either of their parents. Out in the wild population, the early generation crosses show up less often than you would expect if they were thriving, and there is evidence that their body condition tends to run poorer than the purebred fish around them. A few of the scientists who uncovered the swarm allow themselves one careful, guarded line of optimism that over enough generations, all this mixing might work against the invasion instead of for it. That a hybrid swarm could slowly bleed off the very fitness that made these fish such ruthless colonizers to begin with. Perhaps the blending is a slow dead end. Perhaps the river is, in its own blind way, diffusing them from the inside. But the word perhaps is carrying a crushing amount of weight in that sentence, and the timescale is generations upon generations of a fish that spawns by the million. Even a dead end that runs that long is a very long time to keep a river packed with them. The second possibility offers no such comfort, and you should sit closer to it. It is that the mixing does not weaken them in any way that matters, and that what it truly does is make them impossible to see clearly, and therefore impossible to predict. Think back to the single behavior that makes these fish a physical danger to a human being: the jumping. It is the silver carp that throws itself into the air at the sound of a motor. And it is the silver carp that has been breaking jaws and ribs for 2 decades now. The bighead barely jumps at all. So what exactly does a fish that is a living blend of the two do when a boat passes over it? Behavior does not sort as neatly as a mark on a gill raker. A river filling steadily with crosses is a river where the old, dependable rule about which fish leaps and which fish lurks no longer holds, where the danger loses its shape and its schedule. And it is genuinely hard to warn a boater about a fish that no longer behaves like anything with a name. And the third possibility is the one that sits underneath the entire removal effort, and it may be the most uncomfortable of the three. 50 million pounds pulled from the water in 15 years. More than 106 million pounds when you count every removal effort stretched across 25 years. And the river is still full of them. Now, the biologists are careful here, and I want to be just as careful. The removal is doing real, measurable work. It suppresses the adult population near the front. It holds the line. Every single pound taken out is a pound that cannot spawn and cannot push another mile toward the lake. Officials called the 50 million pound mark a genuine milestone, and by any fair measure it is one. But a milestone is a marker you pass on a long road. It is not the end of the road. You do not reach a number like that on a problem that is going away. You reach a number like that on a problem you have chosen to hold at arm's length, indefinitely, with both hands, forever. The removal was never a cure. It is a tourniquet the state of Illinois can never afford to loosen. I want to hear from you on this one, because it splits people. When you are on the water, wherever you are watching this from, and something breaks the surface that you cannot immediately name, do you look closer, or do you look away and keep moving? Tell me down in the comments, and if you have ever had one of these fish come out of the water at you, I genuinely want to read it. Through all of it, the one thing everyone is truly afraid of has not happened yet, and no one on earth can promise you it won't. The carp have not established a breeding population in Lake Michigan. Not so far. The barrier holds. The removal holds. The front sits out there, 30-odd miles from open lake, pinned back by wire and nets in a quarter-century of relentless, exhausting work. But eggs drift. Water moves where it wants to. A barrier is a machine, and machines fail. And a fish that spawns by the million only has to get past the door one single time to change the largest freshwater on the planet forever. And it is not a hypothetical fear. The barrier has already been beaten. 3 times in a little over a decade, a single carp has turned up on the wrong side of that electric line. In 2010, crews pulled a live bighead out of Lake Calumet, a 20-pound fish more than 30 inches long, sitting roughly 6 miles from open Lake Michigan, past the barrier that was built to make exactly that impossible. It happened again in 2017, a silver carp found about 9 miles from the lake. And again, a few years later, another silver carp lifted out of Lake Calumet, 7 miles out. Each time officials said the same careful, true thing. One fish is not a breeding population, and there is no evidence yet of carp reproducing beyond the barrier. Each time, they were right, and each time everyone understood that a fish that spawns by the million does not need to arrive as a population. It only needs to arrive as a pair. So there is now a plan for a last line of defense, a massive re-engineering of a lock and dam downstream, meant to be the final wall if the electric one is ever truly breached, a project measured in years and hundreds of millions of dollars. What the authorities genuinely cannot tell you, the thing that hangs silently behind every proud press release about milestones and millions of pounds, is whether the line they are holding is an actual wall, or only a very long pause before the inevitable. So strip it all the way down. What do they actually know? They know 2 fish came into this river and would not leave. They know those 2 fish are dissolving into each other, and into something the field guide has no page for. They know they can pull 50 million pounds out of this water, and the water will calmly hand them 50 million more. And they know that 37 miles downstream from the greatest freshwater fishery on Earth, the thing they can no longer fully name, is still, right now, pressing toward the door. Here is what this story is really about, and it was never really about the size of a fish. Go back to the bank. Back to that calm, brown, ordinary river you would drive over on a bridge without a single glance. Everything I have just told you is happening there right now, this second, under a surface that gives away almost none of it. The big head sitting motionless in the deep, the size of a man, too large for anything in that water to touch. The silver carp coiled just beneath the light, waiting for the next motor to trip it into the air. And drifting between them in numbers that no one can cleanly count, the ones that are neither, the crosses, the swarm, the category that keeps growing larger than every name we have tried to pin on it, spawning quietly in the current while the crews haul their millions of pounds and the barrier hums its current and the lake waits patiently at the far end of the canal. We brought 2 fish into this river to make its water cleaner. They are still here. They will outlast the plan we drew up to stop them. And in the slow, dim water where no one is looking, they are still turning into something we do not yet have a word for, waiting for the rest of us to look down. If you like this video, YouTube also thinks you're going to like the one on your screen right now.